It is Thursday, it's the 24th of July. I'm Moon Gon-young. This is ARIRANG News live from Seoul. Our top stories today. Korea unveils a stimulus package worth nearly $40 billion to shore up Asia's fourth largest economy after growth slumped to the weakest pace in more than a year in the second quarter. 100 days ago, on April 16th, the Sewol-ho ferry sank off Korea's southwestern coast, taking down with it more than 300 people. We take a look at how this nation is coping with the aftermath. And the leaders of rivals China and Taiwan expressed condolences for victims of a Trans-Asia Airways plane that crashed during a thunderstorm last night, killing 48 people, including 2 French nationals. We'll have those stories and more, but let us begin this Thursday afternoon with a new growth plan to stimulate the Korean economy. The nation's new economic team, led by Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan, unveiled stimulus plans this Thursday to breathe life into the sputtering economy. Government spending would increase by $11.4 billion and another $28 billion would be available for SMEs through loans and other financial support. Now, we'll have those stories, and for that, we have our Hwang Ji-hae.
Korea's new economic team is all geared up to shake the country out of its low-growth rut. The finance ministry said Thursday that the government will seek aggressive fiscal policies that will boost spending by some 12 trillion won, or roughly $11 billion in the second half of this year. That's equivalent to nearly 1% of Korea's GDP. The extra funds will be used to support homebuyers, small and medium-sized businesses, and tourism, and improve the distribution of agricultural products. The government would also set aside around $25 billion in loans and funds to promote corporate activities. The ministry said it will seek an expansionary fiscal policy, even at the risk of running a short-term fiscal deficit. The government also cited the nation's relatively healthy fiscal situation. Korea's government debt to GDP ratio stood at under 34% last year, far lower than the OECD average of over 110%. The ministry also laid out plans to boost domestic demand by providing tax incentives to companies that raise wages. It also plans to tax companies that shy away from investment, wage increases, or dividend payments in favor of hanging on to excessive cash reserves. The government will also accelerate regulatory reforms, and especially that linked to bolstering the nation's real estate market by giving homebuyers easier access to mortgage loans. The measures are based on the new economic team's revised growth outlook for this year. It cut its growth forecast to 3.7%, down 0.4 percentage points from its earlier projection, saying the pace of recovery slowed on sluggish domestic demand. The government expects its expansionary fiscal policy to raise the growth by 0.1 percentage points this year. Hwang Ji-hae, ARIRANG News.
And earlier this Thursday, the nation's central bank said the Korean economy grew 3.6% from a year earlier in the April to June period, after expanding 3.9% in the first quarter. That, as our Kim Ji-yeon reports, is the slowest growth in 3 quarters and marks an on-quarter expansion of 0.6%, which is also the slowest pace in more than a year.
Korea's economic growth took a step backward in the second quarter of the year. The Bank of Korea says gross domestic product increased 0.6% during the April to June period from the previous quarter. That's 0.1 percentage point lower than the central bank's earlier estimate for the second quarter. Central bank officials say growth was hampered by April's Sewol-ho disaster that dampened domestic demand. Private spending was cut by 0.3%.
Due to Sewol-ho ferry disaster, the government could not enforce budgetary matters on schedule, and also there is poor spending sentiment among major participants of the economy. It wasn't more than we thought it would. We will have to wait and see how long this sentiment will continue to affect the economy.
The central bank adds, however, the Korean economy is modestly recovering with rising exports and improving investment. Fueled by a surge in shipments of LCD displays and chemical goods, exports increased 1.9% from the previous quarter. Construction investment inched up 0.6%, while investments in machinery and transportation equipment gained 1.3%. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
And the new economy team's growth plan came during a meeting presided over by President Park Geun-hye, during which her economic team, of course, laid out its economic policy direction for the latter half of this year. Now, President Park called for cutting the red tape that is deterring domestic investment, stressing the urgent need to revitalize the economy following April's ferry disaster. The president said a task force should be established to remove unnecessary regulations to create jobs, specifically in medicine, tourism, and finance. Positively assessing the government's proposed measures to spur domestic demand, the Korean leader asked her officials to seek to expand and improve the current retirement pension system as well. Now, on public sector reforms, President Park talked about removing each organization's excessive functions to bring down their debt levels. It has been 100 days already since this country was struck by one of the worst maritime disasters in history. A passenger ferry with nearly 500 people on board capsized and sank in waters off South Korea's southwestern coast, taking down with it more than 300 lives. What the ferry disaster also revealed were loopholes in the nation's safety management system and widespread corruption in the society. As our Yoo Ji-yeon reports, more than 3 months out, there are more questions than answers regarding the ferry disaster.
It's been 100 days since their loved ones were taken away from them.
I still try to take in the scent of my son, from his room, his blankets, and his bed. I haven't touched his room at all.
How far has the country come in giving these families the answer they so deserve on why the accident happened and who is responsible? The ruling and opposition parties have still been unable to come to an agreement over a special law on the Sewol-ho accident aimed at uncovering the cause.
The whole nation has been asking for a new Korea, but the Park Geun-hye administration has not been able to take a single step forward since the disaster.
Using the suffering from the Sewol-ho disaster for political gains dishonors the victims and hurts the victims' families.
Demanding progress on the bill, some victims' families have gone on hunger strikes and days-long marches. The massive manhunt for the practical owner of the Sewol-ho ferry, Yoo Byung-eun, ended in vain when it was confirmed earlier this week that his heavily decomposed body was found last month. Taking responsibility over the failure to catch the fugitive shipping tycoon, the senior prosecutor in charge of the investigation, Choi Jae-kyung, offered to resign. Prosecutors also revealed that Yoo was hiding behind an upstairs wall in one of his villas in the south of the country, and that investigators had searched the building while he was presumably there. The revelations are only adding to the growing distrust of the prosecution, which has funneled massive financial resources into the investigation to no avail. Down in Pyeongmookgang Harbor at the site of the accident, search operations continue for the 10 victims that remain unaccounted for. 294 people have been confirmed dead. Yoo Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
More than 80% of those victims of the ferry sinking were high school students on their way for a field trip to Korea's southern resort island of Jeju. Confused by the crew's misleading instructions, only 75 of the 325 students aboard the ferry survived. Now, in this next special report, our Song Ji-sun tells us how they have been coping.
The road to recovery for the 75 surviving students of the Sewol-ho ferry tragedy continues. After the disaster on April 16th, The students were treated at the same hospital and have been going through group therapy sessions together since. And 1 month ago, on June 25th, they returned to classes at Tanwon High School. Before the tragedy, the class of 2016 was made up of 10 different classes, which has now been reduced to 4. They now study in makeshift classrooms that were originally used as music or art rooms. The homerooms they used before April 16th have been left intact, preserved to honor the memories of those that perished. Their curriculum is different as well. Therapy sessions are held throughout the week, and 10 counselors are available on campus to help the students if and when they need it. To ensure privacy, media outlets are banned from filming the students or their classes.
We do not want any more attention from the public or media. Please refrain from filming or interviewing us.
But some are speaking out, urging people to remember their friends and to put pressure on the government to carry out a thorough investigation of the disaster.
Please do not forget April 16, 2014. The moment you forget about the Sewol-ho ferry disaster, that's when our futures vanish.
While the junior class at Tanwon High School was the most affected by the tragedy, it's touched the lives of everyone there. For senior students prepping for college, it's been hard to study. To provide support, the National Assembly's Educational Committee approved a bill last week that expands the quota for college admissions for those affected by the disaster. Some 500 Tanwon High School seniors and the siblings of the victims will be eligible. 송지선, 아리랑 뉴스.
All of the day's important events close to home and around the world. Join Moon Gon-yong live from Seoul.
Mobile shopping market for the dual use of the Korean name East Sea and Japanese name Sea of Japan in school textbooks in the state of Virginia. Another plane crash. A Taiwanese passenger plane crashed near the runway on its second landing attempt amid stormy weather conditions, killing 48 people on board. And on this Thursday, the leaders of rival China and Taiwan have come out to express their deepest condolences. Our Park Ji-won has this report.
The TransAsia Airways turboprop was flying from Taiwan's southwestern Kaohsiung International Airport to Penghu Island off the west coast, carrying 54 passengers and 4 flight crew. Struggling to cope with bad weather conditions brought on by Typhoon Matmo, the plane failed at the emergency landing and crashed near the runway. The Taiwanese government says 11 passengers survived the crash and have been taken to hospital.
Apart from the people who were sent to the hospitals, the remaining people probably died. The fire department just told me that, but we still have to verify the details. I hope there won't be too many casualties.
The president of TransAsia Airways expressed his deep sorrow over the accident.
I solemnly apologize to everyone. I'll apologize for this unfortunate event.
The crashed plane had been in service for 13 years, and the pilot had more than 20 years of experience and about 23,000 flying hours. Taiwan's Aviation Safety Council is investigating whether the weather conditions or human error caused the accident. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
A former senior official at the International Atomic Energy Agency has expressed concerns over the close ties between North Korea and Iran. In a piece in Foreign Policy magazine Wednesday, Oli Hainonen said that the relationship could lead to a transfer of advanced centrifuge technology. Now, he says Pyongyang has mastered production of the P2 centrifuge, which is much more efficient than the P1 centrifuge Tehran currently uses. And contact between Pyongyang and Tehran continues as recently as February, when Iran's foreign minister met with his North Korean counterpart to boost bilateral ties. Now, Hainonen says those ties could further complicate international negotiations over Iran's nuclear program, which were recently extended until November. And staying on North Korea, a judge in the United States has found North Korea liable for damages caused by a series of missile attacks on Israel back in 2006. In his court ruling Wednesday, U.S. District Court Judge Royce Lamberth said that North Korea, along with Iran, provided material support and intelligence training to the Hezbollah terrorists who fired a series of rockets in Israel for roughly a month. Now, the judge said North Korea gave the terrorists advanced weapons and advice, with Iran mostly providing the funds. A special master will now be assigned to determine the amount of damages the two countries owe, although it's highly questionable at this point how the money will or could be collected. A Japanese lawmaker says his country has not gone as far as it can toward resolving the unresolved matter of Korean women forced into sexual servitude by the Japanese military leading up to and during World War II. The comments come amid renewed talks on the issue between Seoul and Tokyo, and our foreign affairs correspondent Hwang Sung-hee reports.
An 8-term Japanese lawmaker says Tokyo can do more to resolve the issue of Japanese military's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. At a Heritage Foundation forum in Washington on Wednesday, Takeo Kawamura of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party said Japan has been working to resolve the issue of the so-called comfort women and that it is willing to deal with this. Kawamura added Japan could take the same measures it had done in the past for the 55 surviving Korean victims. These may include providing a letter of apology for the comfort women and some financial compensation from a civilian-led fund. The offer for such civilian-led compensation was rejected by South Korea in the 1990s, as Seoul saw it as the Japanese government's attempt to avoid direct responsibility. Kawamura's remarks come after South Korea and Japan resumed talks on Tokyo's sexual slavery in Seoul on Wednesday, the first such meeting since Japan went back and reviewed its 1993 Kono Statement, which apologized to the so-called comfort women. The Abe administration, while upholding the landmark statement, claimed last month that Seoul was in close consultation with Tokyo when it was being drawn up. Around 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were forced to serve the Japanese military in the early 20th century. But killing any anticipation for concrete progress between the two neighbors, Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga expressed regret over Seoul's reaction. During a press briefing Wednesday, Suga said the review was conducted in an objective manner by experts. Suga added Japan has no plans for new measures to solve the comfort women issue. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
You know, it's a cold glass of beer that everyone probably longs for when the weather gets as hot as this here in Korea. And Korea's thirst for great quality beer has been on the rise. Well, once dismissed as a fad, but time has proven that microbrewed craft beer is here to stay. Our Shin Se-min has more on this beer revolution.
Here is an interesting collection of craft beer. This one right here has a taste of banana, while this one has a nutty chocolate. The number of the thirsty visiting local bars for artisanal beer has surged in recent days.
Local bars like this offer a variety of beer, each brewed in its own unique way, and all leaving an unforgettable impression on the palate.
I've tried a few of these craft beers, and I like it already. There are different tastes and flavors. I think I'll come back and try some other varieties.
Korea has a growing interest in both craft and imported beer.
Our craft beer sales have been rising over the past couple months, with the monthly sales jumping by 4-fold since we opened.
The nation's imports of beer rose more than 25% in the first half of this year compared to 2013. It set up a new battlefield for the beer market.
Currently, craft beer takes up less than 1% of the beer market, and microbrewers face a long battle if they hope to compete against the large Korean companies. There's a better chance that craft beer will overtake the import beer market if current trends continue.
The growing interest in the more refined beer rose in stride with eased regulations on alcohol in the nation. The taxation on microbrewers has shrunk by 20%, and distribution was recently allowed outside of the microbreweries, which has opened up more markets like local bars and even supermarkets. But some aren't completely satisfied.
They don't go far enough. The already eased rules allow microbrewers to produce more, but we are still limited in how much business we can do.
While there is still more to be done to level the playing field for these smaller craft beer makers, recent months have shown that Koreans are willing to spend a little extra for a little something different. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
And now it's time for our daily arts and culture segment. And of course, for that, our Im Yoon-hee joins me live in the studio. So good afternoon to you, Yoon-hee.
Good afternoon.
I hear that you recently went to a Buddhism-themed exhibition. Of course, here in Korea, we know that the most practiced form of religion is Buddhism, right?
Right. So I was able to visit the Central Buddhist Museum located in the heart of Seoul. Now, Buddhism has for a long time been integrated in the history of Korea and has grown to serve not only as a religion, but as a source of history as well. Here's how. Buddhism, a religion based on the life of Siddhartha Gautama, also known as Buddha, whose millions of followers strive to reach the state of ultimate enlightenment and perfect peace. Nirvana. It's an end to the repeating cycle of birth, life, and death, and upon cremation, those who have reached nirvana produce a sarira, including Buddha, who his many followers believe is preserved through these sacred relics.
When Buddha first passed away, his body was referred to as a sarira. As Buddhism spread, sarira also extended to include any precious relics, usually referring to these small pearl-like objects found in Buddha's ashes, as well as the ashes of other individuals who have reached nirvana.
The sarira was placed in a sacred case, carefully crafted to hold the precious remnant. And it's the beautifully handmade case that is now the most valuable. This process of enshrining the sarira became a sacred ritual. And 500 years after Buddha's death, a format for a special statue, called a pagoda, to hold the box was established. Along with the sarira, inside each case was stored historical artifacts, like jade jewelry, talisman, and other riches of the time. The result is a pocket of time, with priceless history preserved in the layers and layers of each reliquary.
After Buddha's death and cremation, his sariras were placed in special containers that had layers of gold, silver, bronze, and iron. This tradition of using the four materials in layers became a tradition in Buddhism. The sarira container is interesting because the smallest container, the one closest to the sarira, is actually made out of glass. And this is because at that time, during the Shilla dynasty, glass was extremely rare in Korea. And when it was first imported from the West, from places like Arabia and Turkey, green glass was considered especially precious.
Sarira worship has taken on many different forms through the many years. But with each protected sarira also comes a protected piece of history as well. Millions of people around the world continue to follow the example set by the life and death of Buddha.
You know, Yoon-hee, to be honest with you, I'm no expert in Buddhism and I don't know much about it, but here in Korea we have a long tradition of Buddhism, and therefore I know there are a couple of sites that, Buddhist sites that needs to be checked out, by tourists, by anyone who's interested in the city. And I noticed that in the report, the museum is located in Jeongno-gu.
Right, Jeongno-gu has a neighborhood heavily influenced by Buddhism, so they actually have the Chogyesa temple, and they also have a Buddhist library
ferry there, along with meditation centers. You could even do a temple stay there as well. So an area known for its, Buddhism influence. But they also, I remember a few months ago, if you remember, I had brought the Lotus Lantern Festival. That also takes place there. And so a lot going on there for people who are interested in Buddhism or people who follow Buddhism as well.
Right. So for those who are religious as well as who are interested in getting some very cultural experience. All right, Yoon-hee, thank you so much for today and all of this week, and we'll see you next week.
See you then.
Good afternoon. The rain has stopped for now here in Seoul, but it's going to return as rain is in the forecast nationwide today due to the influence of the monsoonal front. Now we can expect a heavy amount of rain today in Seoul and Gyeonggi and Gangwon provinces, where up to 40 millimeters are forecast to fall, while 5 to 30 are expected over to the other regions. Now, other than the rain, temperatures have dropped again for the regions where there is rain and also due to the lack of sun and a steady breeze. Now, going over to our temperature readings, Seoul will top out at 27 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will peak up to 30 and 31 degrees. Now, moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops over to 30 as well, while Dokdo and Mankungang peaks into the 20s. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you, Ganya.
Thank you, Michelle, for that. And that's just about all from me at this hour. And check back with us at 4 p.m. Korea time for Business Today.